there. So, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Nice to have you on board. And thank you, Logan, for joining in. And as we said, Muhammad is coming, inshallah, pretty soon. And as I understood, you worked together with Rashid and Yahya on this. So, nice job, everybody. And basically, today's class is going to be about Islam and reason. The homework that you guys did was based on Islam and enlightenment. So yeah, maybe it's worth to take a quick look at these. I'm gonna see in as much as I can share my screen with you. Let's try that. And let's see what we can do. But otherwise, I'll just read off the, but you've got it also with you, you said, right? So to look at it. I'll share it in the group and I'll just read it with you then. I think it's the best option. So yeah, so it's you know what I'm somehow packaging as the second principle of Imam Razvi, which is obviously not only his principle, but it's very prominent in Zaydi Shia Islam, the use of reason, the use of aql as one of the determining factors of the validity of theology on any level, really, as I can interpret it. Really, also in the Hadawi school, I wouldn't say that's limited necessarily to the Bukhari's idea as represented in this case here in the West by Imam Razvi, but really anything that's calling itself Zaydiyya will have aql at a pretty high stage of its theological understanding. You know, having said that, obviously the Mu'tazila are the Muslims that are most kind of famed or somehow well known for their application of reason within Islam. You know, we kind of all know about the Mu'tazila, not really much for me to tell there that's not already known, but just to give a summary, so the Mu'tazila, you know, were and still are to some extent a group that had their basis in Iraq during the age of the Baytul Hikmah, the House of Wisdom, as influenced by, heavily influenced by the Abbasid dynasty at its time. And, you know, they continued to produce currents of thought and influence, waves of influence throughout Islam until maybe the 12th, 13th century. And they even became part of the state theology under Al-Ma'mun, who was somewhat, he was somewhat infamous in that sense because he took it to the extreme of punishing those that had a different viewpoint, which is really quite the opposite of the process of reason, if you will. Which obviously created the anti-reaction, the fundamentalist reaction, and that actually ended up in, if you will, Ash'ari and Hanbali thought, which ended up swallowing whatever was left of Mu'tazila thought going forward for the most part. Fortunately, parts of the Mu'tazila doctrine continued through Shia theology, although I would argue that the birth of both Shia theology, both in its 12er and its 5er expression, or in its Ithna Ashari and its Zaydi expression, as refers to reason, you know, certainly were birthed at the same time and even from the same circle of people, with Wasil ibn Atta, obviously, in his dialogues with Imam Zayd alayhi salam, Imam Bakr alayhi salam, and in that time period, of course, giving birth to the whole process of reason, really. That's obviously contestable, but that's just a, you know, that's just a viewpoint that I'm going to take on that. And therefore, I think that you know, you can trace the clarification of Islam is reason back to at least, you know, that group of people. And of course, it always behooves us as practicing Muslims to stay and state that anything in Islam is traceable back to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And surely that is true. And in fact, so that's the one viewpoint is the more kind of historical Orientalist viewpoint of how did this thought, Islam is reason, you know, generate in the Islamic context. And the other viewpoint is, of course, well, what does the Quran say about that, right? So what I've done and what I think anybody can do whenever they're interested in this kind of work, and probably what you all are familiar with in this group, at least, as I can see by the level of scholarship that is obviously present, is that you can go on a concordance website, like for example, corpus.quran.com, which I'm sure you're all aware of. And you can, you can look up certain terms, Islamic terms or Quranic terms to be specific, based on an alphabetic organization, and they'll list to you exactly where those terms show up in the Quran. So if you go on corpus.quran.com, and I'll put it in the chat and in the discussion, you can look up the root word ayn, kaf, and lam, which is of course, ayn, kaf, lam is of course the root word for aqalu, or aql, which is reason in its purest sense in the Arabic language. And you can find that it occurs 49 times in the Quran, okay? And you can then actually find all of the ayat and all of the placements of the words in these 49 times. And so you can see, okay, the Quran definitely includes the concept of reason, okay? Mm. So it's not just the Wasil ibn Atta, Imam Zayd, and Imam Bakr, peace be upon them all, somehow raising a glass of water at Saturdays on 3 in the morning and saying Islam is reason under the influence of water, but it is actually in the Quran, yeah? Mm-hmm. So that is one, let's say, hermeneutic point, or one, let's say, linguistic example, or even evidence of the existence of reason in Islam or in the Quran, okay? You can do the same exercise. You can do it for the word hukum, right? So ha, kaf, mim as the root word, and it'll produce actually 210 results in the Quran in 13 derived forms. Of course, you know, hukum or hikmah or hakam or what have you, they do have different meanings. It's not only wisdom, yeah? It's not only, of course, one form is wisdom. One form is also judging or judgment. Another form, of course, or another meaning is establishment, commandment, arbitration, decision. So of course, it is wisdom in its pure sense, but then it is also wisdom as it's broken down into application, particularly on justice, so particularly in judgment and taking decisions on things. And of course, you know, the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Al-Hakim, right? So there's no really question that Islam interprets wisdom, if you will, through hukmah as a core element of the conception of the deity, okay, the creator. And therefore, again, we establish another form of reason as inherent to the, or intrinsic to the ontology of the Quran, okay? The same exercise, again, can be done with the term ilm, okay, so ayn, lam, mim. Please I apologize for my pronunciation of the Arabic.
Just wait one second. It says Muhammad is waiting to be let in. He says in the
okay,
chat.
Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to let him in. Okay, thanks a lot for that notice. All right, there we go. He's coming in. Let's see. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam.
Nice to have you on board. Muhammad, how are you?
Alhamdulillah. Good, alhamdulillah.
So it looks like it's the three of us for today. I don't know if you heard anything from Rashid. I think that Yahya cannot join the call because he's very tied up in his today. So I think it's the three of us for now. We'll go for a dynamic trio. Okay. And, yeah. Maybe what we'll do is I was just explaining a little bit to Logan a little bit about what we discussed last week, Muhammad, just to get you caught up. And also we went into the roots of the conception of Islam being reason, okay? Or where does this statement come from, Islam is reason, okay? And we traced it back through the discourse of the Mu'tazila, of course, as the main kind of flag bearers of reason historically throughout Islamic theology. We discussed where that movement came from and its historical ties to Shia Islam, particularly through Imam Zayd and Imam Bakr, alayhi salam ajma'in. And of course, though, then we went to the next step, which is the linguistic step, which is the hermeneutic aspect, if you will, of comparing what's actually in the Quran with our understanding of reason, okay? And that's where we just were. So I was just going through the very well-known website, corpus.quran.com, which is it's basically a Quranic, what's called a concordance. And the point of this is to be able to look up any word in any ayat, in any surah in the Quran, number one. And number two, when you find an Arabic root word in the Quran, to be able to analyze it throughout the entire context of Quran. So for example, if we talk about aql, we can see how it's used 49 times in its root word, ayn, qaf, and lam in the Quran. If we take the word hukm, ha, kaf, mim, we can even see 210 usages. Of course, many of those not only related to wisdom, but also to judgment or decision-making or arbitration. And yeah, and of course, there are different terms for reason also in the English language. We talked about how, for example, Imam Razvi, mainly worked in his years in the German language. And, German has a different kind of hermeneutic or linguistic structure than English. And both, of course, have a very different linguistic structure from Arabic. So sometimes it's hard to kind of, mix up terms and mix and match and try to say that we're comparing apples to apples, because sometimes we're just not. But nonetheless, when we talk about the fact that aql is showing up 49 times in the Quran, hukma is showing up 210 times in the Quran, the term ilm, wisdom or knowledge, is showing up 854 times in the Quran, okay? According to the corpus.quran.com, again, which I highly recommend as a research website for the hermeneutics or the linguistics of the Quran. And then finally, the term for urf, we're getting closer, irfan, which has been known as kind of mystical wisdom or mystical reason, if you will. It's what the Shia like to refer to when they talk about mysticism or spirituality. They don't like the term tasawwuf, Sufism, so much, usually or often, particularly the Ithna Ashari, the 12er Shia, but they prefer the term irfan, okay? So also the root word for irfan, urf, is ayn, ra, fa, and it shows up 70 times in the Quran as well. So if you add up these terms together, just these four terms, and we're not looking at other terms, which are very directly related to reason in some form or other, you come up with more than 1,100 times that in some form or other reason or wisdom or knowledge or spiritual wisdom in some form is mentioned in the Quran, okay? So that's, probably in terms of books of revelation, probably the book, and I haven't, again, I'd have to be challenged by this. Scholars of the Bible, scholars of the Torah, scholars of other books are welcome to challenge me on it. But I'm just going to make the statement, without having done any of the research, any of the comparative theology, that I don't think that any other revelatory book has so many references in so many different forms to the term reason as Islam does, okay? I don't think you're going to find more than 1,100 references to reason and wisdom and knowledge in another work. If you do, that actually makes me happy, because that means that not only Islam is reason, but also other religions are reason. And that's kind of what we need in today's world. We need a large dosage of reason, okay? So the more the merrier. This is not, I'm not saying it to exclude anyone, on the contrary, I hope I'm wrong, but I do believe that Islam pretty much outcasts all the other revelatory books in the sense of simply the amount of times and the context in which reason has been mentioned. Okay? What's the good piece of news about that is that we can take reason obviously not only as a kind of a nice to have or somehow a pretty embellishment for some scholarly people in Islam, maybe in some universities or in some scholarly circles, but we can actually take it as a main fundamental precept and even a prerequisite for Islam. In other words, we can boldly state that there is no Islam without reason. Okay? You simply cannot strip the Quran of reason and it's still the Quran. Yeah? And again, this also has consequences. We were mentioning it in the the Falsafiya Fridays discussion. You know, the asking of questions. What is the role of the asking of questions? Well, obviously, if you don't ask questions, you don't really need to apply reason, right? Because you already know everything. So what's there to reason about, right? But here's the Quran always coming with questions and questions and questions, and they're questions at different levels: rhetorical questions, logical questions, questions, you know, reflective questions. I actually have a great book here written by a Jewish lady, okay? Just wonderful work called Logic, Rhetoric, and Legal Reasoning in the Quran, subtitled God's Arguments, okay? This is a great book by a Miss Rosalind Ward Gwynn, and it's published by Routledge. And it's just full of cross-references all over the Quran to different forms of logic and reason, okay? So again, this is a linguistic comparison by someone who is not Muslim. I want to point that out, okay? And yet she's stating the same thing. Basically, all over the Quran are references to reason, you know, reason-based argumentation, rules, commands, reasons, legal arguments, similarity, analogy, parable, degree, difference, inequality, opposition, categorical arguments, conditional and disjunctive arguments, technical terms, debating techniques, and so on, okay? And she really goes and outlines all of the different ways that reason is applied in the Quran. I don't know if Muhammad, if you were raising your hand to ask a question or make a statement? No? Okay. So this is, again, this is just one piece of work and, you know, by a non-Muslim looking into Islam, okay? And again, you can find another work, and I particularly select the non-Muslim works. Why? Because if we Muslims sit around in our own little circle and we say Islam is reason, that's fantastic. But it's more interesting, I think, when somebody who's outside Islam looks at it and says, yeah, actually, it is reason. It gives it another form of credibility. It's like when your car is broken down and you take it to the repair, you know, of course the mechanic is going to say it's fixed, yeah? But in order to drive, you still need to get the stamp, right? And the stamp comes from a third party. Okay, it's not quite the same analogy, yeah? Because there's no third party certification in this case, but I think you guys get the point, all right? So this book is by philosopher Fridtjof Schwann, a Swiss philosopher, a wonderful book called Logic and Transcendence, yeah? Now, Fridtjof Schwann, apart from being quite a controversial figure of his own, especially in the later years of his life and activity, but he did at some point take a deep dive into Islam. He belongs to the perennialist movement. I don't know if either of you are familiar with the perennialist movement.
Yeah, yeah, definitely, yeah.
So you know Fridtjof Schwann in that case then. So yeah.
Yeah, I was pretty enamored by his writings for a while, but I don't want to get too into it, but his later years kind of turned me away from him a little bit. Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, that's what I was just mentioning. So somehow, you know, unfortunately he kind of unraveled his own masterpiece, if you will, because he'd really. Yeah. I mean, if you look at Friedrich Schwann till he's about 60, you know, he's really a monument in postmodern philosophy. And and then after that, he just kind of took it downhill, unfortunately. So it's a reminder to always be on your P's and Q's, guys. No matter how much you think you're on top of reason and intellectuality, we still have to stay grounded. So grounded in Shariat. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
not the way. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, but I fully agree with you. But nevertheless, if you read his older works like Logic and Transcendence, which I was just showing you, man, I mean, that stuff just can just blow you away. And again, that whole perennialist movement, whether it's Martin Lings, who wrote the great biography on the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, whether it's Kumar Swari or all of those guys, they managed to, even before reconstructivism, which is happening now, right after postmodernism, even during the modernist and postmodernist times, they managed to somehow keep a philosophical trend alive, particularly within European circles and let's say Western circles, to posit that there is indeed a higher power, and that higher power is indeed benevolent, and we should indeed be paying attention. Yeah. So I do believe the perennialist movement has added a lot of value. But anyway, that's another movement of coming outside of Islam, and again stating, yes, Islam somehow is reason. Yeah. And it couldn't be without it. Yeah, it couldn't be Islam without the reason, certainly. Yeah. So through these different channels, and again, if we get into Shia rhetorical debate, if we get into obviously all of the peripatetics, all of the Islamic philosophers over hundreds of years, the Islamic Golden Age, the Baitul Hikmah, the Spanish philosophers, Ibn Arabi. Nobody understands Ibn Arabi today. Yeah, I don't believe that there's a single human on the planet that actually understands Ibn Arabi. Maybe there never was a human that understood Ibn Arabi except for Ibn Arabi. But nevertheless, if you just read one sentence of his, you can be busy for like a lifetime. Yeah, that guy is just unbelievable. Just he alone, again, is another piece of evidence of the contribution of Islam toward the higher goal of reason, if you will. Yeah. And or maybe the other way around, the tool of reason as a higher goal to Islam. Yeah. So whichever way you look at it, I would say they're synonymous with one another. So these are just some evidences, and again, you can look at Mu'tazili works. I have a nice collection of modern day Mu'tazila stuff here. Defenders of Reason in Islam, Mu'tazilism from Medieval to Modern Symbolism. Richard Martin, Mark Woodward, with Dwi Sataja, so you can have a look at that one if you're interested. But you can find so many books on this, guys. You don't need me for that, I don't think. But there are just some recommendations for you. So you can even, if you're interested, you can look into Mu'tazila thought. What personally attracts me to Zaydiyya as opposed to Mu'tazila thought is simply the connection with the Ahlul Bayt and being rooted in the tradition of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But I think that many times the boundaries are very fluid, and I have no troubles at all, with accepting Mu'tazila thought as my own, or vice versa. I don't think there's really an exclusion there. I think Mu'tazila thought can be applied to basically any open-minded school of thought that will accept it. Yeah. So, any comments so far, guys?
I was just thinking about what you're saying right now, and I think it's helpful, as we're approaching topics like this, to get out of mindsets of like being a this or a that, right? And instead utilizing the tools of a school instead. It's like you can use the wisdom of Mu'tazili, and the Zaydiyya, and and see no conflict in doing that, and don't feel like you have to like declare allegiance to one at the expense of the other or something like that. I mean, yeah.
I fully agree with that. I think and I think that's very much in some of the chats that we've been having in the Zaidi, the larger Zaidi Facebook chat, and to some extent in our group. We can see those kind of trends also emerging. So I think a lot of people are starting to leave the identity game behind, this kind of tribalists belonging to this or belonging to that, and kind of staking their flag in the ground and claiming it to be theirs somehow, and not really being able to let go of it, and going more from stasis into movement, right? So just what we were talking about at the beginning, Logan, when we were talking about how the German language can be very static, you know, in its way of interpreting language and linguistics, whereas the English language is much more dynamic in its motion, right?
Yeah.
So it's not so identity based, or I might even say identity paranoid as the German language. So you might have this, you know, huge word for a thing in German, and this one thing tries to encapsulate everything, and then you become very attached to this word, and you can just kind of dock on it. And you know, many German philosophies have, you know, docked on this, like, you know, the Enlightenment or something, yeah? Okay, completely ignoring all the different, you know, sometimes contrasting and oppositional philosophies that emerged from the Enlightenment, yeah? But the Enlightenment, right? As opposed to what you might say in English, which would be more, you know, being enlightened, or simply enlightening yourself, or, you know, enlightening others. So I agree with you. And I think that's the way that identity will move going forward in the future anyway, because I think that today's times, and I think it's a blessing of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that he's birthed us in this time where identities are simply becoming more fluid. You know, more people are traveling all around the world, you know, than ever before. People are speaking with people from all over the world. We have in this call someone from Los Angeles, someone from Singapore, someone sitting in Hamburg, yeah, discussing an Arabic religion, yeah. So if you will, yeah. So you know, nothing more postmodern than that in that sense. And I think that you know, because identity is becoming fluid, it becomes, you know, more and more apparent that your identity is actually what you do and not what you are. And I think that will be the human trend going forward. And I think it's, you know, part of the human evolution of Allah taking us to another level, if you will, you know, leaving behind these kind of tribalist identities and being more individually responsible for what we actually do. So I agree.
Okay, good.
Yeah. I feel that it's about reviving back Baitul Hikmah. I mean, all the different variations of religion, philosophy, all the sciences. Basically, they were grounded in Baitul Hikmah. All the major schools were from Baitul Hikmah, or in that region for that matter. So how it's about how we relook, revisit, and revive the concept of Baitul Hikmah.
Yeah,
I agree. I had for myself, you know, I had this discussion maybe 10 years ago. Somebody was mentioning that Al-Khwarazm, who's obviously the godfather of the term algorithm, right, which is without which this Zoom call could not be possible. And you know, I mean, obviously, the whole entire digital world would be impossible without the contributions of Al-Khwarazm, very simply. And how he was actually supported and you know, his work basically sponsored by the Baitul Hikmah of its time, and how many philosophies and how many directions were spawned by the Baitul Hikmah. So I certainly agree with that to a large extent. I don't know if I would say that all schools necessarily came or were sponsored by the Baitul Hikmah. I think
At the very least, the schools of reason from there.
Yes, that is true. That is true. Yes. But then there was a resistance by the school of non-reason, right, if you will. So so there has been a resistance, unfortunately. And if you look at history, when this reason dies out, and when the non-reason or the anti-reason positions start to grow and become more lively and enter power, is when you see the Islamic civilization start to down spiral, yeah? And basically when you start to see the lack of relevance of Islam in terms of shaping, you know, present and future debate. And that's it, in my humble opinion, the reason that we are where we are, because too many of us have ignored the function of reason for too long. So I fully agree with what you said. You know, a lot of the function of reason can be traced back to the Baitul Hikmah, which in turn can be based back to the circles of Wasil ibn Atta and of course Imam Zayd and Bakr alayhum assalam ajma'in. And of course, as we were saying with Logan, everything is traceable back to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and the revelation of Angel Jibreel through the Quran alayhi salam. So absolutely, guys. And having said that, I don't know how much time we still have on this particular call. I still want to get some feeling for. And by the way, that would be a fascinating project to try to revive the Beitul Hikmah. So let's not forget that one. Let's make sure that we write that in our notebooks. I'm jotting it down in my air-based notebook, and keep that fresh in our minds, guys. That would be a great project for sure. So let's maybe get off the line for now and try to jump back in the call. I still need to get my full Zoom going. I haven't done that yet, unfortunately. So shall we try to come back in the call in about 2 minutes?
Yeah, sounds good, inshallah.
Inshallah.
Where will you put the link for that?
Just use the same one. If you use the same
Oh,
one,
okay.
yeah.
Oh, okay. Sounds good.
If not, I'll send a new one.
Okay.
Okay, guys. Assalamu alaikum.